Welcome to a special BTB Roundtable. I am Stuart, joined with BTB reviewers K Money Kashif and Teresa. We will be discussing Antihero by Gregg Hurwitz, available February 10th from Minotaur Books. Kashif, tell us what you thought of this book.
Uh, I'm a huge fan of books that push the limits when it comes to their characters, especially the protagonist. I'd been waiting for a while to see how Gregg would do it with the Evan Smoak and Orphan X books. I feel like he really did it this time with Antihero because, as we'll find out when you read it, it's the character is just pushed to his limits. It's very dark, it's very visceral, it's darker than I imagined it would go. But in that way, it's also very deeply emotional. So when I read through it, I found myself really getting worked up in a good way, in an emotional catharsis way. But I really loved it, and it really answered that question I had: is what would happen if certain dark events happened and transpired. So I personally loved it for that very reason.
Awesome. Thank
I
you. What about you, Teresa?
I love the whole entire series, how Evan grows and changes, and especially in Anti-Hero, what happens in this one is very relevant. It's very real. The things are happening right now, today. Like this is, and he's challenged. Evan is challenged in a way that he's never been challenged before, and we're seeing like you have a character who has a very strict religious belief, and she's challenging Evan to dig a little deeper, with what he can handle. And of course, there's the whole Joey and Evan relationship grows, and we get Luke Devine back. I could talk about this series and this book for days. Absolutely will not miss anything in this series.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this is one of my, if not my favorite series of books that exists out there. Not only are the characters interesting, but just the way Gregg can put pen to paper. It's very lyrical. The prose seems so fluid, and the way it flows, even the way he titles his chapters, I think is such a creative idea. In this one, especially the emotional charge, all the different characters. We get to see Mia Hall again, which was great. I was so excited to see her back in the series. And this book is just a flat out emotional roller coaster, and I think it's one of the best books in the series. All right, and now it is time for our guest, Gregg Hurwitz. Well, welcome everyone to a special BTB roundtable. I'm Stuart, joined with BTB reviewers Kashif, K Money, and Teresa. And today we'd like to welcome our very special guest, Gregg Hurwitz, whose newest book, Antihero, is the 11th book in the Orphan X series and is available on February 10th from Minotaur Books. Gregg, thanks so much for coming on today and taking some time to join us.
Yeah, it's good to see you all. Thanks for having me on.
So we're going to dive right into some questions. I'm going to take it first, and then I'll pass it off to my fellow reviewers. So I've found you've created such an interesting dynamic between Joey and Evan over the years, including this upcoming novel. You seem to really take them to the brink of finally admitting that even though he's like her uncle person, that they actually love each other. What has the evolution and the creation of that relationship been like over the last, I guess, probably 8 books now?
Well, it's bizarrely the most important relationship in the series. I mean, I didn't think it would be so. When I first created her in Hellbat, she was supposed to be this thorn in his side. She's a pain in the ass, right? He's on a mission for revenge that's very personal, and he gets kind of stuck with her in his care. And they're quarreling the whole time. And basically, she opens up in him this very different sort of emotional awareness. He comes very, very slowly to care about her a lot. And I was supposed to kill her at the end of Hellbent. Fun fact. But I got all the way to the end. And what happened was I just loved so much the things that she brought out in him. I mean, sometimes you have these characters who just shine a light through, your main character. And she brought all these facets of him to life. And that has really become a foundational relationship that I've built across the series. And you're right. This is the first series where he takes her on a mission with him in real time. It's a big movement forward, and the depth of that and the kind of vulnerability that he feels around that and the kind of trust he has to show is a completely different level than anything that's come in the preceding 10 books.
So thank you. Teresa, you can take the next question.
So I'm kind of a little bit of a throwback question. The commandments are such a big part of every single story. And but my question is, which kind of came first, Evan or the commandments? And were they based on some like real like the way you were raised or things like that?
Well, the commandments were an idea that I had that took shape because I wanted to have concrete ways to show the black and white code that he has been trained up in, that he has been made to inhabit. He's trained to be this weapon who views the world in really clear terms. But as everybody knows who's read the series, the key part of the series is when Jack Johns, his father figure and handler, tells him the hard part isn't making you a killer, the hard part is keeping you human. And so in Orphan X, one of the things that happens is he basically breaks all of his commandments in the service of the first time that I introduce him to the plot and to our world in real time. I didn't have them all to begin with, Teresa. I had a couple. I had the second one, how you do anything is how you do everything. I had the fourth one. They slowly filled in. I just started referencing them. It takes 3 or 4 books to get them all even out on the page. But what's really weird is when I go back and look at them, how they filled in are in a very logical order for how I would have constructed them had I been thinking with my prefrontal cortex instead of my lizard brain. So there's weird stuff that happens sometimes when you write. Like these things kind of come together. They're like these puzzle pieces, and then they all just connected as I went in a way that wasn't planned, but obviously was planned at some level.
Kashif?
Well, first of all, just wanted to congratulate you. I'm currently in Dubai. I visit the bookstores, and there hasn't been a single bookstore here that does not have at least one copy or one book on the Orphan X series. So I'm sure
That's
it's a
nice to
big thing
hear.
here.
I
It's a
had a
big
book. I
thing.
did a book tour there a couple years ago, which was a
Ah,
blast. So I'm glad to hear that my stuff's still around there.
it's kicking.
Yeah,
You can trust
good.
me. One question I had, and I was just thinking about it, is pretty much what I've noticed in the Orphan X books. He has a predilection for kind of blending in with the masses. He's very subtle. He doesn't like to attract attention, so he does things very much to stay in the gray, which is not like he's not really trying to expose himself. So, keeping that in mind, what was it that inspired you to write about him as a protagonist, seeing that a lot of the stuff he does is very deliberately low key and, not very showy, not very much like a protagonist, but still somehow it comes across. So, what was it about that idea that really struck with you that you wanted to write about it?
Hmm. It's a good question. Um, one of the things I thought about is so my wife is tiny. I call her my pocket wife. She's like 5'1" on a good day. And she always is annoyed if we're shopping because nothing fits her, right? She needs these like Lilliputian sizes. Her feet are like a size 5. It's like it's even amazing she can stay upright without just falling over like a Bobo doll. And I can go into any store anywhere in the world and fit your average thing off the shelf. Like all of my dimensions to her, infuriatingly, are very, very easy to shop for, to buy for, and everything. And so, in a way, I took that as a template of like that average size, average build, not too handsome, is how I describe him. And lots of the protagonists who we're accustomed to are flamboyant or they're grand or they're very handsome like James Bond or they're huge like Reacher. And so they have these characteristics that are larger than life. And I thought if I'm truly going to write somebody who is Orphan X, who's supposed to blend into the background, why don't I make him like me? Why don't I make him average in so many regards that he can recede and then be a forgotten face on these missions? And once I started to play with that, it became really interesting and fun because that's not a trope that's used a lot. Usually people are menacing or glamorous or suave or devastatingly handsome. And so it became one of the trademarks of the character that he recedes all the time, the same way his truck does. He drives a Ford F-150. It's the most common truck in North America. Nobody notices it.
Cool.
It
That makes
it's interesting you bring up tropes because I've found that a lot of thrillers on the flip side seem to have these really horrible, unredeemable villains. And I think you still have some of those throughout your novels. Like I think of Van Shriver and Janus from Nemesis. But you also have protagonists that you root for and you almost hope to find redemption in. And it reminds me of A Drink Before the War by Dennis Lehane, Gone Baby Gone, that kind of. We have it with Aragon Araya in Dark Horse, Hick from Nemesis, and even in this novel as well. I'm curious, when you are creating characters, both good and, quote unquote bad, do you have goals in that vein when you create them to make them almost equally as lovable as you want to dislike them?
Well, a long time ago, early in my career, I stopped writing heroes and villains and started writing antagonists and protagonists. And I found it's much more interesting when I'm creating a character if what they're saying, maybe 15% of it speaks to you. Maybe if you squint your eyes and cock your head a little bit, their worldview makes as much sense as the one that you've inherited. And so I always want to be tempting the reader in those ways. And increasingly, as Evan is hatching more and more into a greater humanity, there's a lot of things that he has to see reflected back in himself that aren't flattering. I mean, Nemesis, in the last book, he goes up against Tommy, who's his best friend. And, a good friend holds up a mirror. A good friend is a mirror. And a lot of what Evan sees are not things that he might want to see as they have this clash of their codes that come together. And so he has to start to alter and figure things out. And it's very similar in Antihero. The antagonists who I have are this pack of very nihilistic boys, young men. I mean, they've been raised online. They don't really care. They don't have an engaged ethic. They have full nihilistic view. Even when they're doing things that are horrific, they don't even have a moral attachment to it almost. And as Evan in this book is called to a higher ethic because the woman who he helps, who he's rescuing, who has been brutally assaulted, pulled off a subway in New York City, he goes to help her and he goes to try to find these men who assaulted her and battered her. And she's a devout Orthodox Christian and she makes him promise that he will not kill them. And so he's forced in this book to integrate this higher ethic. And the opposite of a higher ethic and greater meaning like that he's contending with and grappling is just full-blown nihilism. It's not necessarily an evil that we think of that's sort of is seething in self-awareness. It's just the cold existential howl of nihilism. And so there's a real counterpoint that's set up, and we're wondering throughout this book, is he going to be able to do it? Is he going to be able to not kill these young men who I think the readers will believe deserve to be killed? But also, can he survive this? Because he's going into a mission that's very dangerous. And how's he going to do it with one arm tied behind his back?
Yeah, interesting. Cool. Thank you.
How do you balance? So you've got the high octane thriller part of it, and now I feel like Evan's moral code is like coming through, and he's getting softer, and he's learning himself. But how do you balance that softer side with characters like Mia? I mean, Candy's not exactly soft, but he's you've got the Joey part, but how do you balance that?
Well, if you just have action, nonstop action, it gets really fatiguing. I mean, we've all been in those movies where you just feel like you're getting punched in the face with an action sequence that's never ending. And if you don't have that deeper engagement with the characters and their relationships, novels really are characters in relationship. It's such an important part of novels. And especially with Evan's migration from being a lone wolf into this weird community that he lives among a little bit more than this hodgepodge group of people he's collected, a lot of smart women among them. It's his emergence into thinking about things and engaging with the world differently. And if I can modulate that, I think that the action scenes and the intrigue and the menace, first of all, they have bigger stakes because we care about the characters who are in them, who are thrust into these dangerous positions. And additionally, what happens in the action is almost an extension of character. Once you know Evan well enough and he's resolving a situation, whether it's with violence and action or threat and bluffing, he's doing so in a way that I think we value because we know him through his relationships and we know he's handling them differently than Bond or Bourne or Reacher or some of the other protagonists who are out there who we know and love.
Interesting. Just want to actually ask a follow-up on that. You did mention that you infuse, and it's very, very clear from your stories that you infuse the narratives, the action with a lot of heart that follows into the action sequences. I've been a huge fan of your action from the moment I picked up the Orphan X book in the first place. I was thinking, what's your inspiration for crafting? Like, do you look at certain places and think, "Ooh, this would make like a good sequence"? Because your sequences are very, as I've observed, they're very meticulously plotted and they're very gritty. They don't feel outlandish, even though it could easily seem like there's one man going around and taking out bad guys, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels very much vulnerable. So I wonder, how do you get in that headspace, or what is it that makes you think about action in that way, that it's a lot more grounded?
Hmm. Well, that's very kind of you to say, first of all. I'm glad that you read them that way. Um, I'd say there's two parts to that. The first is what we were talking about a little bit earlier, which is every action sequence is an extension of character. When I'm writing, everything is an opportunity. What does Evan drink? It's vodka. Why does he drink vodka? Because it's the purest liquid on earth that mirrors the alchemical process of changing base matter into something pure, the same way that his evolution and training took him as this dirty, unwanted kid from a foster home and trained him to be the greatest assassin in the world. Where he lives, what he drives, everything has a reflection into character and it should be like a feedback loop that we're just immersed in this world. That's always the aim. That's what I love when I'm reading. And so the action sequences have to also be specific to him in a way that an Orphan X action sequence always feels like it is something that he would do alone. It's not sort of an average shootout in a warehouse that could be any one of a handful of people. It's always something where he's bringing the fullness of himself into it. Now, that's a little bit from the fact that Evan, in his ordinariness, as we've talked about, he's not the best person at any one thing. Tommy's a better shot. Joey's a better hacker, right? Everybody's better at one thing, but he's a lot more like Ulysses. He's the man of many wiles, and he has to bring the totality of himself to an action sequence to persevere and then to change, to bring some kind of transformative change. The other thing I'll say is that I think of action sequences as their own little 3-act plays. They all have to be structured. They all has to have an internal theme to them in a lot of ways. I like a lot of times if there's a comedic effect. I mean, there's one that I have where Evan's fighting the guy at the base of an indoor pool that's like in a spa. And he keeps fighting this guy and he's knocked a guy out in the pool. And the guy keeps regaining consciousness and he's sludging through the pool to get to his submachine gun that's at the edge of the pool, and Evan's fighting off a guy and he has to keep picking up a beanbag gun and hitting the guy in the head and knocking him down, and then he returns to the fight, and then the guy gets up and then he's closer to the gun. I like there to be a ticking clock and subplots even within the action, and so that he's constantly up and it's almost like he's juggling all these different sets of balls at the same time, and we have our eyes on a number of different things that all coalesce like clockwork around an action scene.
Yeah, that's
Do you,
impressive.
do you find the same thing or approach more emotional scenes the same way? Like I think back to, there's this really beautiful part in Nemesis where he's kind of reflecting back to a moment with Jack. And Jack is talking to Evan about basically how to manage his emotions. And the metaphor you use is like this orchestra. He is the conductor of the orchestra. You put your anger over here, you put your anxiety over here, and your joy here, and you're conducting it. Do you find that you approach these emotional scenes in the same way, these kind of like mini 3-act plays, or especially with regard to Evan and Jack, like how that interaction operates, or is that its own kind of whole story arc?
Well, they always stitch into the themes that I'm playing with in the books, right? And so you mentioned that scene in Nemesis, yeah, where Jack tells him all these orchestras are going to roar, and if you can't conduct them, then they're discordant. But if you can figure out how to orchestrate them, then they can harmonize. And so there's all sorts of things. There's emotional, there's physical, there's psychological, and it's about making sure all these things work together. Jack is really training Evan in the Stoic tradition in a lot of ways, right? He's training him to be strong of body, strong of mind, strong of spirit. There's a strength in him that has to be consistent all the way through. And so Jack trains him about how to deal with women so he doesn't lose his mind over women when he's in the field, right? He starts that training very young. Some of it he finds rather pleasant. So it's not just limited to mixed martial arts fighting and sniper rounds. It's also limited to how can you keep your cool in the face of sexual arousal, right? How do you maintain if you're scared or you're in pain? What do you do with that to continue in the furtherance of the mission? He's constantly trained to have to balance everything and hold this center as he goes through impossible circumstances. And that's what I put him through, book after book after book. Antihero is a different kind of impossible situation. He's never had to go into pursuing something with a vow that he will not kill. And we don't know if he's capable of it.
So kind of a little bit of an off the wall question. I know, so Evan lives an average life to everybody else, but inside of his penthouse, there is nothing average except for Vera. And so I actually Googled the floating bed, and it's coming in at like $1.6 million to have it. Is there anything more expensive inside of his penthouse?
Some of the vodka's in that freezer, Teresa. They'd put that floating bed to shame. There's a couple rare Stoli Elites with Himalayan water and that go for a pretty penny. But no, that bed's a pretty nice part of it. But, I think Evan constructed it partially himself, though, in different pieces with the rare earth diamonds. I don't think he went and, he didn't go shopping on Charles Street in Boston and bring that thing home. I think he put it together. But he's got unlimited money. A lot of the money from the DoD for the orphan program was fed through the Department of the Interior because nobody thinks to look there, and then deposited in all these non-accounting bank accounts around the world so that he never, or rarely, when he was on missions as Orphan X, would have to touch base back to get money or to get things moved. So he was completely set up, and by the time he flees the program and Jack's wiped off the boards, he has this unlimited amount of money. As Liam Neeson says in Taken, a very particular skill set and a lot of time on his hands. And that's why he chooses to reinvent himself as the Nowhere Man.
Tasha?
Just yeah, one of that since you mentioned, we've been talking about the commandments and a couple of ways you just very beautifully and eloquently mentioned about how Evan tries to go through his emotions and how he's prepared. I wonder if you ever thought of having a book where it's all just about Evan's way of life or the Orphan X's way of life, because a lot of the things killing and violence aside, but a lot of things that's mentioned, it's very cool the way he approaches the commandments, but a lot of ways where he approaches, no distractions, his own meditation. It sounds pretty cool. Have you ever thought of having, kind of like a sidebar novella where it's just, oh, Evan's approach to life?
That's so funny. The Way of the Orphan, a self-help book. It's in a lot of them. Look, I recently was nominated for an Edgar, which I'm very pleased about, for a short story I wrote. It's an Orphan X profile, actually, for the Mysterious Bookstore, the Mysterious Bookshop in New York, which is one of my favorite bookstores, too. And there's a lot of that. It's a sort of a description. I frame it in a dialogue between him and Joey. And it's a bit of there's some action in it. It's a bit of a structured out scene, but we go back through his life and I sort of set the template around who he is. I prefer to get those things conveyed in fiction. It's funny that I always hate writing like flap copy or pitch documents. Like I don't do any of that shit. Or when you need like the first pass of marketing, it feels like college, admissions essays almost, where it feels like homework. And when I'm writing, there's something, it's coming from a very different part of me. And so if I'm asked sometimes to sort of summarize or pull out the lessons, it starts to feel like work instead of play for me. And I also think, if I could just say it in a manual, then I wouldn't have to write the whole damn book. You know, if I could summarize it, there's something about it being in narrative form, I hope, that gives it a greater depth and resonance rather than if I just spell it out. But that said, I think it's not a bad idea. It'd be kind of fun to see if somebody else wanted to compile that. Lessons from a lifetime of assassinations.
The monkeys of lore appear in every book and are probably like the main reoccurring inanimate piece that we see book to book. Where did that idea originate, and was there a reason you decided to keep that rolling?
My first novel, called The Tower, which I began as a wee lad of 19 years old, has a serial killer who is messing with a profiler, and he's killing bodies and posing them in that way. He gouges the eyes, then he takes the ears, and then he takes the tongue. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And it's just such a creepy image. And then I started to collect these monkeys from all around the world. Like I have them, carved from balsa wood and made from stone in Brazil. And I have all these crazy ones. And I just love it. There's something about the creepy repressiveness of it that just lends itself to key imagery. So yeah, it's hidden in every single one of my novels.
Cool.
Funny that you noticed.
Joey's, I think her favorite snack, or one of them, is the red vines. Am I right? Is it?
Yep.
Yep.
Mhm.
So do you have a favorite snack when you write?
I like Smokehouse almonds a lot. And my favorite snack for after I write is bourbon.
Not vodka.
I love vodka too, for sure. But man, I love bourbon. Bourbon's like goes into my writing DNA. Vodka's a more fun drink. It's more social in some ways. But I have great bourbon, great vodkas. Because if I write about it in Orphan X book, a lot of times their sales go up. And so people send me them. I have these engraved bottles. I mean, I have a beautiful vodka collection. In fact, that might be even worth more than my floating bed, Teresa.
Yeah, last question from me, more on the as I mentioned, I'm a huge fan of the action. So I noticed Orphan X, he has a way with his pistols. He's always, for longest running pistol that he has is the Ares 1911, and then he has a very specific that it's always in my head when he's talking about his boots, talking about his button down, the magnetic shirt. More on the weapon side, was it something that you saw somewhere that okay, this weapon look cool, the boots look cool, or you have to research it? How did that come about?
Well, I went and shot all the guns that he has shot. Like I did mixed martial arts training for a long time before I started writing the series to experience it. Because if I experience it, I can write it from the inside out. I can write about that terrible claustrophobia when you're getting choked out on a mat instead of using a cliche. Like, and then everything went dark. So it's like we're trying to avoid what we're looking for all the time are these little details that give verisimilitude, where you feel like you're there and they poke you that they're there and you're imagining it and you're feeling it. And so with the gun, I went and shot a bunch of guns. He starts with a Wilson 1911. That was just, I really like wheel guns. I like a Smith & Wesson 357 revolver. But as an operator, he's going to have, a pistol that's something that's got a little bit more room and holds a bit more, it holds more rounds. And then a certain way in my consultant, who was a wonderful, wonderful guy. His name was Billy Stojak. I borrowed his last name for Tommy, in fact. Crusty old, early UDT diver, like before SEAL Team 6 even, knew a lot about breaching, crusty old wavy Navy guy, handlebar mustache, might be familiar. He would, have, smoke and tobacco patches and caffeine. And I mean, he was all half off his rocker, but he emailed me and he said, look, man, you got to check out these Ares. It's a solid block of machined aluminum. It's immensely untraceable. And so third or fourth book, I upgraded Evan to the Ares because it's a ghost gun. And that suits him all the better. And so then, it comes almost where like he buys them, he goes into Tommy and Tommy gives him a Pelican case with a bunch. He's buying them almost like you get 6 tacos at Taco Bell, right? Because he slags them when he's done with them. So that was a fun little piece that developed as I was writing.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Greg.